You've authored many super interesting books, lots of which have been turned into feature movies, like the movie 21, The Social Network. And didn't you write for the X-Files at one point?
Yeah, so early in my career, I worked for the X-Files. I wrote a book for them. So it was like a
Okay.
standalone thriller starring Mulder and Scully. So
Okay.
this was a long time ago. But yeah, I started off my career writing techno thrillers, medical thrillers. I wanted to be Michael Crichton. That was kind of my goal. And nobody read those, so they didn't do very well. And it wasn't until I started writing nonfiction that my career kind of took off. But yeah, the X-Files was one of the first things that I worked for. Yeah.
That's amazing. Did you ever work with Vince Gilligan?
I mean, phone wise, they were up in Vancouver shooting the show. So I went up there once. But I wasn't, on set or anything like that for anything.
You get pitched a lot of stories, I assume, every day, every week from different people. Out of all like the different stories and ideas that get thrown across your desk all the time, how do you choose which ones to pursue?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. So basically, ever since I wrote Bringing Down the House about the MIT blackjack team, and
Right.
that book kind of exploded among college kids. And so after that book came out and then the movie came out, people would just email me or send things to my Twitter. I would get pitched 2 stories a week. And usually, it's somebody in prison trying to make their case, or it's some story that isn't going to be, it's something personal, someone wronged them or something like that. So most of the stories you just know aren't going to be the right story. But for me, I'm always looking for something that's like big enough that everyone in the world will recognize it in like one sentence, but not already so well known that you've already seen it a million times. And so it's that tricky kind of, sweet spot between something you don't really have to explain to something that you don't already know. And it also has to be a movie. Like I won't write a project or even start a book if I don't think it can be a major movie. And in fact, for the past, I would say 15 books, I've sold the movie before I've sold the book. So I write a proposal, sell the movie rights, and then sell the book rights and write the book. So I won't even go into it if I don't think there's something big enough to be a big Hollywood movie.
Wow. And was the first book that you wrote or the first book that you authored that turned into a movie, was it the movie 21?
I had a TV movie way back in my crappy techno thriller days. I wrote a book called Reaper, which was about a computer virus that makes the jump to the biological world and people start getting sick from their TVs and from their phones.
Oh,
And
Jesus.
I wrote that a long time ago, and that was made into a TBS's premiere movie back in 2000, I think it was. Starred Antonio Sabato Jr. and Robert Wagner. I think you can find it somewhere on eBay. But my first feature film was 21, which was Bringing Down the House, and came out, I think the movie was like 2007, the book was 2002. Yeah.
So could you give me sort of the backstory on that, how that all came about and how you got into that story or how that story came across your path in the first
Yeah, so
place?
I was writing, thrillers. I was trying to be a thriller writer, and they weren't going well. Nobody was reading. I had gotten myself hugely into debt, like $1.5 million in debt. I had IRS agents calling me. I was like, I was in a messy situation. I had something like $70,000 in credit card debt, and I basically had a stack of business school applications that I was filling in because I was thinking there's only one way I'm ever going to get out of this hole I've dug, and that's to go to business school and go to Wall Street. So
Get some more student loans.
basically, I was in a troubled situation. And then there was this group of MIT college kids. I was introduced to them by the girl on the team who was a friend of mine from college. I went to Harvard down the street. And they used to hang out in this local bar called Crossroads in Boston. And I would go in there and hang out with these MIT kids. And they were telling me these crazy stories. The main character's name was Jeff Ma in real life. And Jeff would tell me these amazing stories about him and his buddies going to Vegas every weekend and using math to beat the game of blackjack. And I went to his house, and he had like $250,000 in $100 bills just jammed in his laundry. And I was like, this is really cool. I got to start going to Vegas. And so I started going to Vegas with them. And I thought this was better than all the crap I've been writing. So I wrote it up. I sent it to my agent, and he said, well, nobody really cares about cards, because this was right before Chris Moneymaker won the World Series of Poker. So cards in Vegas were not yet hot. This was like 2000 or even the late 90s when I started writing it. And so I sold the book for a tiny amount of money. And it exploded. I mean, when it came out, it was just a huge book. It was on the New York Times list for 63 weeks. And it was just one of those things, that life-changing moments. And around the same time, I had written an article for Wired magazine about this MIT blackjack team, and Kevin Spacey read it. And back then, getting a phone call from Kevin Spacey was like a good thing. And so, Kevin called on the phone, and I remember getting the phone call, and I didn't really believe it was Kevin Spacey. I ended up hanging up on him. I thought it was a prank phone call, but it really was Spacey, and he invited me out to LA and said, I want to make this into a movie, and that became the movie 21. And so it was kind of this, life-changing story, and suddenly I was a nonfiction writer, not really by choice, but that was the book that did well, and suddenly, everyone started pitching me stories, and that's where my career really started.
So he didn't have any ulterior motives when he flew you out to LA, right?
Kevin was always great with me. I don't know why. It wasn't his type, but Kevin was always wonderful. He was a phenomenal actor.
Oh yeah.
He was odd. Kevin's odd. I mean, you knew stuff was going on. I mean, you didn't know what was really going on, but you knew he was living, a different lifestyle than maybe you might guess. But no, I never really, saw anything that was, what came later. At the time, he really was helpful. He set up this movie, said he wanted to star in it. And that's pretty much the only way to get a movie made, is to have a major actor or a director or someone at an A level involved in it. And it took years, though. It took 5 years to get that movie made. It wasn't like an overnight kind of situation. But the book was on the list for a couple of years, which was amazing. And started off my career in a really great way.
Yeah, that's interesting. He called you directly?
Yeah. So his assistant at the time was a guy named Dana Brunetti. Dana actually is now a very big producer. And, we worked together on a lot of projects, and then he went on and helped me do The Social Network. And then he did 50 Shades of Grey and made a pile of money. And now it's like a prepper living in Northern California. But Dana was his assistant, and basically found my phone number and just called with Kevin on the line, and said, we want to make this project. And, it was a crazy time in my life. I was massively in debt. I had no money. I flew out to LA and met with them. And I remember their pitch, they took me to the Playboy Mansion. I landed, and basically they drove me straight to the Playboy Mansion to woo me into signing the deal with them. So it was a kind of a wild sort of Hollywood moment. And at the time, I was in I had no money, and Kevin and Dana said, we want to make a movie. And I said, great. How much are you going to pay me? And they said nothing. And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, we're not going to give you anything. But we'll make this movie. And around the same time, another group of producers offered me $750,000 for the rights. And so I went back to Kevin and Dana and said, listen, these other people are offering me $750,000. I'm majorly in debt. You have to give me something. And Dana said to me, if I gave you a big check right now, what would you do with it? And I said, well, I'd probably spend it, because that's what I was living this crazy lifestyle. I was blowing through all my money. That's just the way I was living. So he said, we're going to give you something better. You can use our name. You can use Kevin's name. You can go out there and promote the book. And we're definitely going to make this movie, and it's going to be worth way more in the long run. And so I ended up turning down the $750,000 and taking zero to make the movie with Kevin. And it ended up being the right choice. Because I booked the Today Show, went on the Today Show and talked about it, and the book just skyrocketed, and everything kind of worked out, and the movie got made. So who knows what would have happened if I'd gone the other route? But it was one of those sort of wild Hollywood moments.
Wow, that is super interesting. What a weird moment, going straight to the Playboy Mansion with Kevin Spacey.
It's funny. Now that sounds very different than it did then.
Yeah, right.
back then it was, listen, I was a kid living in Boston. It was a long time ago, and you walk in there and it's like, wow. At the time, it was the greatest place to be in the world, and it was amazing and wild. And it was neat. I've always sort of looked at Hollywood as this place that I can jump in and out of. I never wanted to live in LA. I never wanted to be in Hollywood, but I love the idea of being a Boston guy, living in Boston, and being able to sort of go there when I need to for a couple of days and then get back out.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. Hollywood's a weird place. I'm not a fan of that area for more than 24 hours to 48 hours. I want to get out. Just like Vegas. The best days when you get there, or the best 2 days, the day you get there and the day you leave.